Pole position.
Yeah, we have answered. Just to read the answers. Gotcha.
Are you ready? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this preliminary round of the 2016 World Schools Debating Championship. Please turn all your mobile phones off. Thank you. The motion for this round today is: this House believes that Obama's administration for employability has done more harm than good. Speaking for debating this round are Team USA, who are proposing, as well as Team Israel, who are opposing. Speaking for the proposition are first speaker Sonja Huang, second speaker Milan Raj, and third speaker Liz Young. Please welcome them. opposition are first speaker Noam Levy, second speaker Toma Sacker, and third speaker Maya Zawadi. Judging this debate are Vincent Löwe from Germany, Simon from the Netherlands, and Julio Maya from Mexico. Please welcome them. Speaking time for the speeches is 8 minutes. The first and the last minutes are protected from points of information. A knock ring will be sounded after the first and after the 7th minute. There are no points of information during the reply speeches. It's now my pleasure to welcome Sonja Huang, the first speaker of the proposition, to open the debate.
President Barack Obama once promised change. Change was his motto that galvanized the nation, and 8 years later we have had change. Because now when America kills, it does it with drones instead of soldiers. Now when America exploits the developing world, it makes sure to call it a cooperative trade deal. And now when America spies on other countries and kills innocent civilians, it makes sure to apologize afterwards. Because this is not the change that the world believed in or the change that the world needed, we propose the motion, this House believes that the Obama administration's foreign policy has done more harm than good. In this speech, I'll begin with some framework, then introduce the first two substantive arguments of the proposition. On framing. An Obama presidency came with the unique opportunity to cure the sickness that plagued America, the disease of toxic interventionism. President Obama pledged to make his counterterrorism policies, quote, more nimble, more transparent, and more ethical than the ones pursued by President George W. Bush's administration. As side proposition, we recognize the hefty load that was left from the previous 8 years, but we also understand that many voters elected President Obama because they were sick of war and sick of intervening in other countries. Therefore, our framing for the round is one that holds President Obama to the standard of reorienting American foreign policy. We will agree with most of side opposition that President Obama has had some constructive wins. However, if we show you that 1, the overall nature of his foreign policy did not change in regards to intervention and violence, and 2, that he sets a negative global precedent for the rest of the world as they should engage in foreign policy, then we have constituted how the Obama administration's foreign policy has resulted in more harm than good. Our first substantive argument is that Obama has cemented violence and intervention as American foreign policy. Obama has continued to normalize violence and killing through drones, creating a legal and cultural framework for violence. Michael Boyle, an Obama counterterrorism advisor, has indicated that the administration has taken its own interpretation of the legality of drone strikes, which allows them to use it in the name of counterterrorism. However, the UN itself has raised questions regarding whether the US has violated international laws with these senseless drone strikes. In fact, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism estimates that the Obama presidency has launched more than 390 drone strikes in 5 years across Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. 8 times as many proved during the entire Bush presidency, as well as bombing Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, and Syria. We can look to Operation Haymaker in Afghanistan in 2012, which was intended to target enemies. Instead, more than 200 civilians were killed. 35 targets were eliminated, meaning 82% of the people killed were civilians. Drone strikes have also jeopardized the stability of the governments of Pakistan and Yemen, possibly risking more chaos if they are overthrown. Most importantly, however, his actions have set the precedent for other countries. 5 years ago, India had virtually no US weapons, but in 2014, it was looking to import armed Predator Avenger drones from the US to bomb Pakistan, becoming the US's second largest buyer. Within a few years of Obama's presidency, India felt fine ordering large-scale weapons to replicate the same type of violence that President Obama promised to condemn. The impact of this is that the culture of violence the Obama administration has perpetuated has not been consistent with his original promises and sets a violent precedent for the rest of the world. We agree that foreign policy is complex, but that doesn't absolve a president whose foreign policy, I'll take you in a second, is supposed to change the way we orient ourselves towards violence, not encourage the exact same policies. Go ahead.
Could you tell us why the alternatives to drones, which are either putting boots on the ground or doing nothing?
We reject the notion that the America has to always intervene in other countries in the first place. That's the premise of the proposition. We don't think that this American-eccentric notion of always having to go to other countries and fix their problems is always the right solution, and we believe that President Obama, by pursuing this path, caused more harm than good. But let's move on to the second layer of analysis, which is that Obama has made the world less secure through intervention. One of the primary obligations of foreign policy is to provide security for the United States and reduce conflict around the world. Obama instead has failed to achieve both of these goals by using counterproductive U.S. foreign policy. Two layers of analysis here. First, on military interventions. What we see is that President Barack Obama had an opportunity to do a complete 180 away from President Bush's interventionist policies, but instead he's just embraced them. In 2011, he intervened to overthrow Gaddafi in Libya and elsewhere in the Middle East, which only escalated conflicts in the region. Regime change in Libya ultimately failed because of Obama's presence, meaning that the nature of foreign policy and our orientation towards interventionism has not changed since Bush. That is uniquely bad given Obama's opportunity to divorce himself from the interventionist policies in the past. But secondly, we see he's also escalated tensions and imposed a military presence in the South China Sea. Obama made orienting towards Asia a pillar of his foreign policy, but since Chinese President Xi Jinping began building a military base offshore in the Philippines, Obama began militarizing aggressively surrounding countries like Singapore. By intervening in the South China Sea and militarizing surrounding countries, Obama has aggressed China and made them more hostile towards the surrounding countries, certainly not reverting away from Bush-era philosophy. Additionally, we see that Obama has continued to fund Saudi Arabia and, by extension, violent groups. Before I go on, yes?
Why would leaving those countries to crumble and deal with problems they can't deal with alone better?
The problem is, as a general trend, we see Obama has often rushed into making decisions. So when he suddenly pulled out of Iraq and Afghanistan, this is what left this power vacuum that now extremist groups are able to fill. We're not saying that leaving is always bad or anything like that, but the nature in which he conducted it by making hasty decisions is one that we condemn and one that we believe has caused more harm than good. But let's get back to this point on Saudi Arabia. The Obama administration has given over $8 million to Saudi Arabia, who in turn uses that money to bomb Yemen and target the Yazidi Christian minorities. They also use these funds to build military weapons, aggress our allies in the region, and support illegitimate proxy wars in Jordan. Obama failed to revert away from Saudi Arabia, a country that continues to commit human rights abuses, and by extension refused to revert away from a Bush military-industrial complex. But our second layer of analysis here is under economic interventions. Obama has continued to aggress nations economically, refusing to revert again from these interventionist policies of the past. When we look to Russia and the sanctions that were imposed there, we see that Obama has extended for another year these sanctions for the Ukraine aggression. He began sanctioning them in 2014 and increased the sanctioning again in 2016, and now Russia's economy is imploding with spiking oil prices. So what do we see here? Essentially what we're telling you is that when we're weighing what constitutes foreign policy being more harm than good, is that first of all, the overall nature of the foreign policy has to change away from the dangerous interventionist mentalities of the past, and secondly, that we have to look to the global precedent that he set not just for future presidents of the United States, but also other countries as well in the region. No thank you. Because of all of these factors, we believe on Team Proposition that the Obama administration has done more harm than good, and we urge you to feel the same.
Speaking time was 8 minutes and 10 seconds.
Thank you, Sonia Warm, for the
Mr.
speech.
Chair, you have to knock so we don't hear the whistle.
But muss ich einfach ein bisschen lauter. Nach der ersten Minute, nach der 7. Minute.
Man hört es
Man hört es nicht, Ja, kann ich machen. Es ist halt besser einfach noch und glaub mir. Ja, besser. Und dann so, dass man es hört. Okay, korrekt.
Now, please welcome Noam Levy, the first speaker of opposition to all politics.
If Team USA want to win this debate, they can't just throw example of bad things that happened while Obama was committing his foreign policy. They have to show us and analyze the cause and impact that the U.S. foreign policy had on those things, and not that it just happened in the same time, because we think that any other president in the situation needed to face the same problems that they showed us. More than that, we are going to show you unique and exclusive influence that Obama administrations had, and how he set the course of dialogue and sometimes military intervention only when it was necessary. I'm going to have 2 points. First of all, I'm going to talk about the power of diplomacy. Second of all, I'm going to talk about the power of mindful military intervention when needed. Before that, a couple of points of rebuttal. So we heard that Obama killed a lot of people using drones. First of all, we're going to tell you that we did it so we won't have to sacrifice American soldiers in these areas. Second of all, we'll tell you that with drones, we're able to choose the exact time and location in which we commit the strike to make sure that we don't have as much civilian casualties as we could have. Third of all, we're going to tell you that it hurt Al-Qaeda in the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan very much, which we think is very important. And fourth of all, which is a very important answer, we're going to tell you that even if there are civilian casualties, we think that there would have been more civilian casualties had we done nothing. Had we allowed terror to continue rise in those areas and hurt the civilians themselves. So we think that this intervention was something that was needed in order to prevent it. And even if they are right and that it did create a lot of damage, that it still does not win the debate, because they have to show us that there was, in general, more harm than good. So even if there is some harm, it still doesn't mean that they win. Second of all, we heard from the first speaker that they reject the notion that America always has to intervene. And we're going to ask, okay, so does that mean that you're going to tell that the best solution, the best alternative was to not do anything? We think that this is completely ridiculous. We think that this means leaving those people who are completely open for attacks in those areas without any help, which we think would have been much worse. Also, we heard about the power vacuum. And to that we have 3 answers. First of all, we think that ISIS was created long before Obama, so we don't think that Obama was actually the one that created ISIS. Secondly, we're going to tell you that we needed to get out of there eventually. Someone needed to do it. The fact that right now it was Obama does not mean that it was his fault and that his foreign policy has done more harm than good. Third of all, we're going to ask you, so what is the alternative? We're going to tell you that by staying, hundreds of thousands of people died. And from them, 100,000 civilians. We think that we had to leave somewhere, and Obama was the one to do it. Also, we heard that Obama was not the opposite from Bush as he promised. And we're going to tell you that Obama didn't need to be the opposite from Bush. We think that the policy in which you sometimes intervene militarily and sometimes you solve the conflicts with dialogue and with connections is the best policy. You don't always have to be either that or that. And we think that this is what Obama did, and we think that it was very good. Now I'm going to move to my first point, the power of diplomacy. So in 2008, the U.S. advocated for force first. They weren't considered a negotiation partner, and they weren't considered someone that you can actually negotiate and make an agreement with. They weren't ready to compromise on certain issues that we think that they should. And we think that Obama changed that notion. We think he changed the tone and he changed the attitude in which the U.S. approached certain issues in certain situations in the world. We think that he was more willing to negotiate, he was more towards diplomacy and finding solutions with connecting with other countries and with making agreement with other countries, and he was more towards uniting the world in order to fight the problems together. And we're going to tell you that it wasn't my way or the highway anymore. Now it was us fighting common problems together. And we think that this had some significant achievements. First of all, let's talk about the Iran deal. So Obama declared that attacking Iran would be his last resort, would be something that he least wanted to do. So because of that, he united the world in order to sanction Iran. He came as the more impactful source with more countries in order to solve the problem. And with that unity, he was able to pressure Iran to actually negotiate a deal because he had more power. So what does that deal exactly mean? First of all, it means that they reduce their enriched uranium, which means that they have 1 year instead of half a year in order they actually are able to get a bomb. Secondly, it means that there are 15 years where they're not allowed to develop anything in those areas, and they're not allowed to enrich their uranium. Third of all, which I think is very important, they're allowing inspectors full access to their nuclear facilities and allowing supervision to make sure that there actually no such thing happening. And we think that this is really good. We think that this is linked specifically to Obama. Because of his foreign policy and because he was very diplomatic, he was actually able to sanction Iran because he had more power, because other countries were willing to work with him. Secondly, we're going to talk about the alternative. The alternative was attacking, and we think that this would end up in a horrible thing, because even if this would be a conventional war, we think that it would still be very bad, because we're talking about potentially 200,000 missiles directed at American targets, at Israel, and in Saudi Arabia, which we think could have ended up in being really bad. So we think that Obama actually did a really good job there. Secondly, let's talk about the Paris Treaty. We're going to tell you that climate change is the biggest threat and the biggest problem that the world needs to face today. Because if we continue to do nothing, the temperature is only going to rise 3 to 5 more degrees till the end of the century, which is going to be catastrophic, because that means that icebergs are going to melt, which means that a lot of cities are going to be flooded, and it means that there's going to be a lot of damage and a lot of death in the area. And we think that Obama recognized that. I'll take you in a second. And because he recognized that, he led an agreement, taking substantial steps in order to solve that.
Yes. We're not disputing that climate change is bad, but the treaty and agreement he made is non-binding, meaning there's nothing actual accountable holding him to that.
Okay, we think that the fact that he was actually able to create this deal in the first place is a great achievement, because we think that because of his diplomatic foreign policy, he was actually able to convince countries that are today considered the most polluting countries in the world to do those things, and we think that they are going to follow this agreement. So we think that 195 countries, including India and China, which are the most polluting countries today, agreed to pollute less and agreed to use renewable energy as much as they can. And we think that this is linked specifically to Obama because he was the first president to actually recognize the problem of its magnitude and realize that we have to do something right now. Secondly, because he was the first president to agree that the U.S. should also solve the problem and should also take major steps in order to do that. Third of all, let's talk about Cuba. So Obama agreed to renew diplomatic relations with Cuba and lift the sanctions. This has shown the world the willingness of the U.S. to put aside ideological differences and prioritize a new uniting approach. This is how the U.S. should use its leverage in order to promote human rights within, not by isolating countries that don't agree with it. Furthermore, let's talk about Myanmar. So we think that Obama was willing to lift sanctions and restrictions in return to a sensitive negotiation, which led the country to historic diplomatic elections in 2015. We think that all of those significant changes could only take place with Obama's new approach and with Obama's diplomatic policy. Okay, second point, the mindful military intervention. We think that while maintaining diplomatic agenda, Obama used military force wisely, and we saw it in two instances. First, with eliminating the leaders of Al-Qaeda, specifically Osama bin Laden, and second of all, how he led a coalition of Western and Arab countries together in order to fight ISIS. So we think that since the beginning of airstrikes and helping the Kurds, ISIS has lost nearly 50% of its territory, which we think is very good. So basically, what have I shown? I've shown you that, first of all, his diplomatic agenda caused many, many good things, and even when he militarily intervened, he still did it in a way that united the world and was able to solve severe problems. Thank you.
Speaking time was 8 minutes and 80 seconds.
Thank you, Yuan.
It's not correct.
I'd now like to call Milan and Raj to give his speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, what side opposition wanted to engage in today's debate was simply a comparison of examples. But remember the analysis that Sonia gave you at the beginning of her speech. What makes the Obama administration so unique and so uniquely powerful for change is the fact that it had the opportunity to reorient America's entire position to foreign policy. Because it failed in that specific goal, and because in that regard it set a bad precedent for the entire world as a whole, we proudly propose this motion that this administration did more harm than good. In this speech, I'm going to be doing three things. Firstly, responding to some of the substantive matter we heard from the opposition. Secondly, rebuilding some of the arguments Sonia brought you. And finally, presenting our third substantive argument, that Obama has contributed to a dysfunctional international system. But let's begin with some of the things we heard from the opposition. Now, beginning on their first argument, where they talk about fighting problems together, the first thing they talk about is the Iran deal here. Firstly, we think they need to engage in more analysis here, right? Pointing out single instances in today's debate isn't going to win them the round. They have to show you why this presents a trend for better foreign policy. But nevertheless, let's engage with the Iran example. We say that when President Obama actually started these talks, all he did was remove international sanctions that punished far more than just a nuclear program. They punished a state that continued to use ballistic missiles, that backed the Assad regime, and backed violent groups such as Hezbollah. All this represents is just another instance of the Obama administration rushing to action without considering the long-term implications of removing the leveraging the international community had over a country that continues a multitude of abuses. Then they talk about climate change. Three responses here. Firstly, we think when we're talking about environmental policy, that's not foreign policy in today's debate, right? They can't really claim advantages off of that. Secondly, we think even if you buy that it is in foreign policy, these talks were non-binding, so no change actually went done. China can still continue polluting and doing whatever they want. But thirdly, even if you think in some fantasy world real change actually occurred, they don't draw a causal link between Obama actually being the primary motivator of these talks. So don't allow them to have advantages based off of that. Then they give you this assertion that somehow India and Middle Eastern countries are pushing forward in terms of green technology because of Obama, but they don't give you any actual link as to why he was the primary motivator of this. They just say Obama pushed towards environmental policy, other countries did the same. Correlation at best, no causation there. Then on their second substantive argument, there was literally only 20 minutes spent on this, but I'm going to spend a lot of the time rebuilding my case, answering some of this refutation. But on the international coalition they list here, we think that the problem with this coalition is people disagreed in terms of countries within this, so it only bred more instability in the region, right? That's the problem with their analysis there. Moving back onto the material Sonia gave. Now the first thing I'd like to bring to you again is the burdens we set on ourselves at the beginning of this round. We told you first off that the unique capacity for change that the Obama administration has is one that they did not fulfill and one that they did not use wisely. At that point, we think that's a primary reason that the administration did more harm than good. But secondly, we think the bad precedent that they set is a huge reason to think that they did more harm than good. Now the first thing Sonia talked about is cementing violence. We talked about drone strikes here. They gave you three responses. First off, they said that ground troops were worse. But this isn't the comparative in today's debate. It's not between sending troops in or sending drones in. It's between sending drones in or not intervening at all, which we thought was a far better response. But also, we think that Obama not only sent in the same amount of capability, he increased it drastically, because as Sonia tells you, he sent in 8 times the drone strikes as during the Bush administration. But the second response they give you is that there were no casualties. We think that in the Haymaker strike, when 84% of the targets killed were casualties, were civilians, that argument is empirically denied. But thirdly, they said it hurt al-Qaeda, right? Even if you hurt al-Qaeda, all you did was create a vacuum for ISIS to come in, which is a far greater threat in the region. Then they answered this argument about the power vacuum. They said, firstly, ISIS was there long before. We think this is a ridiculous argument, right? The Obama administration intervening in the first place is what caused the strife in the region that allowed ISIS to capitalize on anti-Western sentiment that caused them to gain power. Secondly, they said someone had to leave the region at some point, not if someone hadn't entered in the first place, right? That's the problem with their analysis here. Third and finally, they say, by staying, a lot of people died in the region. Well, we think this is a contradiction. On the one hand, they say, we saved a lot of lives by intervening. On the other hand, they say, a lot of people died by the U.S. staying in. Which one is it? You can't have it both ways under their side of the house. But now let's extend some of the things Sonia told you. The first thing she told you is that we cemented violence in the international community. And we think the increase in drone strikes is a perfect example of this, but then we also talked about, on a broader trend level, setting a bad precedent for other nations, right? This is when India continuously buys more arms now. We think that's because the Obama administration set a precedent of violence in the status quo. Then we talked to you in our second argument about military intervention, and we didn't really hear any response from side opposition to this. We said that when we looked at things like the Gaddafi regime in Libya, or like when we looked to the Middle East and China and the South China Seas, the Obama administration really aggressed more and caused more strife in these regions, creating more tension, creating more strife, no response. Then we talked to you about economic violence in terms of Russia and sanctions, and we said that was a particular instance in which more conflict and more violence was caused because of the Obama administration's short-sighted policy. Again, no response. But with that being said, let's move on to the third substantive argument, that the Obama administration has contributed to a dysfunctional international system. Obama promised to renounce American exceptionalism and create a better functioning international system. Instead, all he did was continue to frequently use other countries as a means to an end and break down the international community. 3 layers of analysis. First, spying on allies. In 2013, the NSA took an unprecedented approach towards monitoring our allies. From taping the German Chancellor Angela Merkel's private cell phone conversations to the 24/7 monitoring of 35 major world leaders, we have vastly overstepped our bounds with the treatment of our allies. There are a total of 43 phones that the NSA refuses to release with the information surrounding it. Our efforts, however, in the US only led to a 2% success rate with strategic information. We think this is a gross overstepping of our bounds, and we think one that really didn't provide any strategic benefit to helping the international community. Second layer of analysis on breaking international law. The Obama administration set a precedent of circumventing international law to achieve his agenda. The US has signed human rights treaties promising not to utilize practices such as torture or indefinite detention, I'll take you in a second, as a means of gathering intelligence or security. But when we look to places like Guantanamo Bay, it's clear that we see a presumption of executive privilege used against suspected people, not those who've actually been proven as terrorists. Go.
But you're not telling us why this is more important than the good things that we've shown you. You have to compare between the harms and the good, not just talk about things that might be bad in some
Thank you.
situations.
First off, I answered all your examples. Second off, I told you those are isolated incidents, not something that presents an actual trend or an actual reason why on the whole the Obama administration has done more good than harm. Also what we say, however, is that when we refuse to grant due process to prisoners in America's prisons, yet only 7 of the 779 prisoners are actually people who were convicted, we think that's a gross harm and something that flies in the face of international law. Third layer of analysis, the Obama administration has continued to fund conflicts around the world, often supplying both sides of the war itself. President Obama took a firm stance against terror and ISIS, however has sold weapons to regions linked in helping various members of extremist groups. The United States inked another giant arms deal with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 2015, and this was for far more than previously. We saw 10,000 advanced anti-air munitions, laser-guided bombs, other bombs, munitions, crazy weapons that would not have been sold in the previous regime. And when the Saudis have been raining down bombs on Yemen since previously, we think they're only funding that side of the conflict. What this shows is the hypocrisy of the Obama administration when they said they were taking a stance against terrorism, yet they funded countries who actively back these terrorist groups. At the end of the day, this debate isn't going to be won or lost on single examples. What we showed you on the proposition is that on the whole, in terms of setting a bad precedent and not capitalizing on the opportunity for the change that he promised, Obama did more harm than good. That's why we proposed.
Speaking time was 8 minutes and 13 seconds.
Thank you, Milan. It's now my pleasure to ask Thomas Sacker to It's now my pleasure to ask Thomas Sacker to give his speech.
Okay, wait a second, the present. Okay, in my speech, I'm going to explain about the world problems that Obama inherited and why did he make the best of a bad situation. But first of all, a whole lot of rebuttal. Okay, so first of all, one clarification. We've heard that you need to judge the debate according to a precedent and a chance to change. And we say, first of all, we've already explained to you why did he change from a foreign policy that basically said if we have a problem, we will attack. He made a change and said that we'll not just will not only be diplomatic, will not only be aggressive, will choose what's best according to the situation. We think that's a very positive, needed change. But think about what does that even mean? In more harm than good, you have to calculate the harms and the goods and decide if there were more harms than goods. And we say that the comparative in this debate is not a vacuum of foreign policy. It's not, for example, if the foreign policy in Iraq made Iraq a good place, but if the foreign policy in Iraq made Iraq the best place possible given the circumstances Obama inherited, and and given the other alternatives the United States could have used. Okay, second of all, about not intervening. First of all, we say that in Syria, he almost did not intervene at all, check. In Iraq, not intervening basically means exiting Iraq, check. And I'll also explain why even intervening in Iraq is damaging. And thirdly, in Russia, still not intervening, again, I'll explain why even if he intervened, it would still create damage. Now, about Iran, we basically heard, they hurt human rights, he rushed into a deal, think about the long term. I think we did. If we compare ballistic missiles versus an atomic bomb to the country you don't trust with ballistic missiles, I think we made the right decision. I think atomic bombs should not be in the hands of Iran. Sorry. About Paris, we've heard it isn't a foreign policy. 195 nations signed an agreement. How is that not a foreign policy? Second of all, not binding. We say first of all, there's just the fact that there is an infrastructure for an agreement is important. But second of all, we say they are making change. They might not make any change that's written in the contract, but they're still making change. It's still a very needed improvement. Lastly, about why is it connected to Obama? First of all, because United States in that agreement was one of the key factors to move and recruit, for example, India and China. And second of all, because no other precedent wanted to even deal with that unsexy subject. Second of all, about coalition and damage, they basically said sometimes the coalition didn't agree. Yes, that's what coalition means. We just said that the fact that there was a coalition is a much needed improvement in the fight against ISIS, and it works. 50% of the territories ISIS has lost. Third of all, about the comparative is not intervening versus drones. First of all, and we just say, okay, that's a terrible comparative to your side. We say that we needed to intervene against Al-Qaeda. We needed to intervene against those Pakistan terrorists. We needed to intervene. And yes, if there were civilian damages, first of all, we already said that there were much more if we didn't intervene. But second of all, we're willing to concede there were some misguided drone strikes. It still doesn't win your debate. No, thank you. And lastly, about the argument we heard from Deputy of Prime Minister, we've basically heard about spies, about tortures, about unfair court systems, and we say, first of all, we didn't hear what's the damage of all that, how is that harmful, and second of all, we say that even if the damage we buy is basically credibility, we say that the credibility has improved significantly under Obama by using diplomacy and not just raw power to solve any problem. A thing that made Obama look like the United States look like a bully. Yes.
First you say we have to intervene in other countries, then you tell us that we didn't intervene in Syria, Iraq, and Russia, and that was the right thing to do. Which one is it?
No, I'm saying that what he did was the right thing to do, and I'm going to analyze why also not intervening, as you said, or intervening more significantly as were a were worse alternatives. That's what I'm saying, and I'm going to do it now. So I've already explained to you what is the comparative in this debate. Basically, comparing the other alternatives that a different president would have done for the problems that he inherited. Now let's move one by one, each and every major world problem that Obama inherited, and explain why the chosen action, which is either mild military aggression or diplomacy, was the best foreign policy possible. So first of all, Iraq and ISIS. We say basically he exited, which basically means not doing a whole lot, and he used the coalition to attack and funded the Kurds. And why? And we say that is working right now. ISIS is losing. Now, why not staying in Iraq, which is basically the alternative, staying in Iraq and trying to form a democracy? Why not? Why isn't that better? Now, first of all, we say military occupation does not create a democracy. We say that in those places there is already a lot of anti-West, anti-US sentiment and propaganda, and we say that staying in there and trying to form democracy will just prove those sentiments right. And we say but because of that, staying there will just create more hatred, will just create military resistance, as we see that is already happening in Libya, in Afghanistan, in Palestine. We say military occupation does not create democracy, military occupation creates military resistance. Second of all, what does that mean? The vacuum will eventually happen. You'll eventually have to leave. If you can't create a democracy, eventually some president will have to leave to cut their losses. And we say that eventually means that ISIS will eventually rise, ISIS will eventually happen. And what does that mean? If ISIS will eventually rise and a democracy will not happen, we say that just by staying there, you're just increasing the hatred, you radicalize more people towards hatred, and we say that, and you kill people in the process, 100,000 deaths in 7 years. Second, about Syria. First of all, we say that the best case scenario on their side is not intervening at all, because that's what basically we're doing right now. We say the best case scenario on their side is intervening in the start 2011. Why is that a problem? First of all, it was a messy situation even back then, because there were a lot of different parties. Most of the parties hated the United States, which basically means that you're not only fighting in an unstable, unclear war, but you're fighting in a war where most of the parties, even the ones you fight along with, hate you. Second of all, even if they managed to actually get control of Syria, why is it still a problem? We say it's still a problem because we have already shown you they cannot create a democracy. They just, again, make more hatred, kill more people in the process, and radicalize more people. And when they eventually leave, they'll create the same vacuum that enabled this war in the first place. Thirdly, about China, we say that basically there are two alternatives: intervening more aggressively or not acting at all. It's pretty clear that intervening more aggressively is a ridiculous course of action because we don't want a US-China conflict. Why isn't acting at all a problem? First of all, because of US credibility, there are a lot of allies that are getting hurt right now, especially in Asia, and we say that US credibility will be harmed if we don't act at all. Second of all, because it's working right now. We're trying to stop, we're able to stop China from actually using power. They're now using talks in Beijing with US diplomats, and they're using actually the hub HI doing. So what have I shown you today? Not only have I shown you that what is the right comparative in this debate and why do we win according to it, why the foreign policy in ISIS, in Syria, and in China were the most efficient one, and any other alternative would have caused worse damage. Thank you.
Speaking time was 8 minutes and 25 seconds.
Thank you for more seconds. Please welcome this round the third speaker of Team Proposition.
There has been a woeful lack of engagement with the intricate framing that we give you on team government. Team opposition can throw examples at you all they want, but the point at which they fail to engage with the standard we give you for how to actually weigh more harm than good, we say they've lost this debate on face value. We say that Obama had an opportunity to reorient America away from violence, but instead continues to embrace the policy of kill first, ask questions later, because we regret that he's taken a hearty embrace as his position as executor-in-chief. That's why we're proposing this motion. In this speech, I'm going to do two things. First, some strategic errors on team opposition side of the House. After that, two questions you ask yourself. First, have we oriented ourselves away from violence? Second, what is the dangerous international precedent that they have set? But first, let's go through some errors. First, they contradict themselves. They stand up here and they tell you that, oh, intervention is good in places like Iraq, for example, but then they say, no, we shouldn't intervene in Syria. They don't provide you this blatant, like, black and white scenario that makes no sense. They say the only options for foreign policy is either intervening or not intervening at all. No, there's a middle ground. That's the only place that we're actually analyzing. This is the idea of not just taking a black and white stance towards either you're my enemy or you're not. Second, we tell you that they're only saying that Obama is responsible for fixing the problems that he caused in the first place. That's the definition of giving the ultimate, like, participation award just for, like, trying to fix what you started in the first place. We're saying presidents ought to do things like help other countries' economies grow. That's an expectation, not something that when weighed against, like, refusing to acknowledge the fact that the United States is literally going out and killing civilians every day and turning a blind eye to that. That's always going to outweigh. Third point of error on team opposition's side of the House is that they provide you no metric by which to actually gauge more harm than good. We give you two concrete reasons at the beginning of Sonia's speech. Millen tells you this, and I'm bringing up this material again now because it's very important. We say the point at which he campaigns on a platform of hope and change, the point at which the American people demand a harsh step away from the Bush era of interventionism, and he doesn't capitalize on that opportunity, reorient our approach towards violence, and then actually stop the rest of the world from replicating us. That was a missed opportunity and something that we think did more harm than good. If they stand up here and throw you just examples, are they holding Obama to a higher standard or a double standard? We don't know. We're the only side that gives you actual framing. First question you ask yourself. I'm going to address what I think is their biggest arguments coming out of team opposition side of the House before I go on to that. Their biggest argument is this idea that, oh, Obama was increasing diplomacy and doing the best with what he had in this situation. I deal with this in the framing, but I'll address some points on this now. One, we say that diplomacy is an expectation, not something that you can say, like, is amazing when we give you distinct analysis on our side of the House as to why there has been material lives lost in the status quo that we have not seen in the past. What they tell you on the Iran deal is that, oh, this was a great thing that we were opening up this ability to talk to other people. Ignoring the analysis that Millen gives you in his speech, we're saying that removing these sanctions, once of all, was a problem that, like, was started earlier by us, and then, like, getting rid of the sanctions and giving them this money ignored the long-term impact that Iran gives money to organizations like Hezbollah and Assad, which cause potential problems in that area of the world. Second, they talk to you with the climate change. Millen explains to you why they don't give you any causal link as to how Obama actually was the one, like, organizing this. Like, he was not the, like, American savior coming in and championing this. No, he was not the, like, key person in this. We tell you that even if Obama somehow brings all these people together, it's a non-binding agreement, so at worst, that symbolic action, now we think climate change is a good idea because it's non-binding and there's no way to actually hold these people accountable. Nothing gets done in the long run. Third, what they tell you is underneath Cuba, they say we opened up relations to them. Great, that's an expectation that we should be trying to help other nations. We say the point at which they want to stand up here and throw you example after example without giving you actual logical analysis as to how that functions in a world in which we provide you a clear framing, we say that is woeful and we regret the fact they can't do that. Why does the framing we give you and the analysis we give you outweigh? One, we tell you that we talk about the opportunity that Obama had to revert away from violence, missed opportunity, and that has actually, like, undermined our credibility. Second, the long-term impacts about what happens when we fail to reorient ourselves away from violence. I'm going to talk about that right now in the first question. One, have we reoriented ourselves away from violence? I talk about this in framing. What they say is Obama made a change. Yes, we say a change for the worst, and that inaction in this situation was a conscious choice to not distance himself from the toxic interventionism which literally plagued and imperialized the rest of the world. We say under the option of drones, we say that when we go up there and talk about, oh, this is for counterterrorism, that's under the guise of being able to turn a blind eye. We would rather say that we want to save our own American soldiers than watch civilians die. That's morally reprehensible, and we're going to stand up here and denounce this policy and say it's bad. Second, underneath this, and I'll take you in a second, the point at which Obama actually launches eight drones, 8 times more than Bush, the point at which literally this Tuesday there was a drone strike that killed 300 people in Syria, we say that's a problem. Go.
In all the examples you gave us, why would a different foreign policy make a better thing, for example, in Syria and Iraq?
Okay, here's the problem with that statement. One, even if you can say oh, there were these other alternative ways that Obama could have taken in these instances, you're saying that you're not engaging with the comparative we bring you. This debate is not simply about saying, oh, Obama did this good thing here, and this bad thing here. No, this is not an example war. This is about actually picking the way in which Obama could have reoriented ourselves away from violence and analyzing the long-term effect that has. That's the difference. The government side of this debate is the only side analyzing the actual long-term implications of our policies. Second question, what is the actual international precedent? There is no engagement from team opposition side of the House on the matter that Sonia brings you about drones in the way in which we say India 5 years ago basically had no drones, and now they're our second biggest consumer of drones because they saw the way in which we were able to justify the slaughter of innocents. They turned to us and they want drones now, and now we supply it for them. We say that's something that we ought to not be doing and something that Obama had an opportunity to revert away from, didn't capitalize on. Second, underneath security, no engagement on what we tell you about Libya. We say that Obama went into the situation, escalated it, failed regime change, and ultimately it was a disaster. What they would tell you is that, well, someone has to do something at some point. Okay, that's not a response when we're telling you that Obama did not have to continue this mindset that Bush had, that America has to intervene in all instances. Yes, even if you buy what they're saying about military interventionism being good, one, they don't give you a metric as to how we would determine that, and two, even if they did provide that metric, they don't weigh that against what we're telling you about the long-term precedent and the unique contextualization that we give you on our side of the House about Obama's unique potential in the world. Underneath this coalition argument they're bringing you about the Western Arab coalitions, one, we tell you that they don't provide you a causal link between Obama actually organizing this again. Just because he's an actor doesn't mean he was in charge of the entire thing. Two, even if he was in charge of this coalition, we say it resulted in more harm than good because there was actually more tensions in the region. That's why we see a lot of the conflicts that are happening now within the Middle East. Our third argument that we tell you is the idea of spying, and this interacts uniquely with their third argument, which was functioning military interventionism is bad, which contradicts what they're saying earlier about how we should never intervene. Which is it? Mean to pick, but it's kind of late now considering that's going to be the third opposition speech. What have we told you? Team government is the only side in this debate that has provided you an actual concrete metric by which to gauge more harm than good. If team opposition wants to stand up here and throw examples at you all day, that's not engaging in the comparative and the contextualization of the opportunity Obama had to create change and the fact that he failed at doing so. Thank you.
Speaking time was 8 minutes and 32 seconds.
Thank you, Isreal. Welcome Maya Zavedi, the third speaker of Team Opposition.
material. Can I start? In this debate, we believe that we were the side who gave you analysis and not examples. We were the side that even when they did give you examples, actually tied them to Obama inherently in every case and showed you why they serve our analysis and they serve the point and actually characterize what he did. Three clashes in this debate. First of all, we're going to talk about Obama's diplomatic approach. Second of all, we're going to talk about his intervention when necessary approach. And third of all, we're going to have a comparative here. We're going to balance all the goods and harm, which is what this motion is supposed to be, and tell you what outweighs each other. All of the rebuttal in the clashes. But first of all, a little framing, you can call it. We believe that the world right now has a lot of bad things happening. We believe that these things are not because of Obama. They just happen because of other presidents, because they just did. We believe that this motion has to be judged not on what Obama did specifically, but what could be done. Because if we're just judging him on something that every other president would do, then this motion is not about Obama's foreign policy. It's about the United States, every president's foreign policy. We believe that this is not the correct way to frame this debate, and this is the way that we're going to debate it. No, thank you. So now the other side said that the most important thing here is that Obama changed the policy from Bush. He decided he was supposed to be against violence and pro-diplomatic intervention. First of all, we say that to a large degree, yes, he did, and I will talk about that in my clashes, that he has changed the policy from actually not being like my way or the highway, not fighting with every single person, and actually using diplomatic means to talk to other countries, to negotiate, but more importantly, no thank you, we don't say that diplomacy is what you're supposed to do every time. I think that both sides would agree that sometimes, sadly, intervention is necessary, and we believe that this is how this debate should be judged. But let's talk about diplomacy. The other side has completely ignored our analysis and examples about Obama's diplomatic policy. They ignored what we told you about Myanmar. They ignored what we told you about Cuba. These two examples serve to show you that Obama actually believes in negotiating. He believes in being able to put ideological differences aside. He believes in democracy. This is why Myanmar had their first democratic elections in 2015. This is why Cuba is not isolated anymore, is not living in the 70s. We believe that this is the correct way to use examples to serve your analysis, not what the other side would like you to believe. Next, we've shown you how Obama has actually used economic sanctions on Russia instead of just having an all-out war. Now, we don't think that any of the sides would like a US-Russia war. We don't think this would be the best-case scenario everywhere. We think that by using sanctions that hurt Russia's economy very badly is the right way to go, is the right way to actually intervene in that place.
Before that.
Now, okay, sure, let's go.
Even if Obama has led all these diplomatic positions, why does that uniquely outweigh his refusal to stop killing civilians at a rate of 82% more than terrorists?
Thank you. First of all, I will have a comparative in my third class. But second of all, we believe that in many cases, the fact that people are dying is not his fault. Syria is a huge mess. Iraq is a probably smaller mess, but it's still a mess. The fact that people are dying is not necessarily his fault. We do not bring us any causal links to that. But I will talk about the war in my comparative class. Now let's talk about climate change. We all agree that climate change is probably going to kill more people than Syria and Iraq combined. We believe that this issue is very, very important. Now, the other side would like you to believe that we did not prove any causal links between climate change and Obama. But this is really not true, because Obama was the first president to actually realize that this problem exists. Obama was the first president to convince 195 countries to join him and realize that this problem exists. Now, they would like to believe that this is not a binding contract. But let's see it like this. We would all like to live in a world in which nobody pollutes and we don't have climate change. However, if everybody pollutes, we would like to pollute as well. So, by actually tying these 195 countries together, by telling them that having them sign an agreement, we really make them pollute significantly less, even if it's not binding. And then when everybody else is not polluting as much, these countries, China and India, the world's biggest polluters, have an incentive to also not pollute. That was on the on the diplomacy. Let's talk about intervention. Now, we do not believe that we actually had a contradiction in our case. We believe that you should sometimes intervene, sometimes use diplomatic means. Now, the fact that we did not intervene in Syria but did intervene in Iraq is because the situations are clearly different. Syria is a mess. We don't know whether we can actually help the rebels or not. While in Iraq, we could to a certain extent. Nothing is sure, but when we actually have a place in which we can intervene, quite surely, and in the other will not, we'll clearly choose the one in which we can. The other side talked to you about drones, about how drones hurt people and kill people. A few answers to that we're not fully rebutted. First of all, it's probably better than having boots on the ground. It's probably better than doing nothing and letting terrorists kill people. More importantly, drones actually allow you to know where the terrorists are and attack them. And more importantly, even if we concede that drones are harmful, in my third flash, I'm now going to explain you why drones are not what's going to win this debate for the other side and why they're severely outnumbered by the good things that Obama's foreign policy has done. Yes?
When those drones uniquely foment the anti-Western sentiment that causes terrorism in the first place, doesn't that just mean he's solving problems that he caused in the first place?
No, it doesn't. And I will talk about that in my comparative flash, which I will be starting right now, finally. Let's look at the comparative here. We both agree that we should look at the goods, look at the harms, see what has gone. What are the benefits that Obama had? We've shown you why he at the very least started solving the crucial problem of climate change. He was the first person who actually took a step forward in an issue that can be extremely beneficial to this world, which we believe already wins us the debate. Second, we've shown you why he made so many diplomatic choices. And by the way, diplomacy is not something that you just expect from people, because clearly Bush's administration did not have as much diplomacy. I believe it is crucial and something very unique to Obama, not like many of the other things you said. So diplomacy, we believe that the diplomatic achievements that he had, the way that he brought democracy to Myanmar, the way that he lifted the sanctions on Cuba is actually helped the United States' credibility in the world. The coalition against ISIS, the Iran deal, all these things made the Obama administration and the US be that one country that you can actually trust. Not the world's biggest bully like Russia is. They're the country that can negotiate. They're not just the lone sheriff that attacks people, but they're the smart, good sheriff that listens to you. I believe that this is what helps US credibility. This is what helps the world. Now, Obama administration did have problems. Every single policy will. We're not going to say that it was completely perfect. Yes, the drone situation is not ideal, but we have shown you why it is clearly not as bad as the other side is showing it, and why it is not Obama's fault entirely that is happening. We've shown you why Obama uses a policy of intervening when it's necessary and not just whenever he wants, and why that intervention is actually good. And we've shown you why not intervening at all would have caused probably a lot more damage. Let's sum up this debate. We've shown you why Obama's diplomatic actions have actually been the difference and the change that we needed, but why only having diplomatic actions is not enough and sometimes intervention is needed. Because we can't judge Obama's foreign policy in a vacuum. Because we need to judge it in a world where every other president would have probably done worse. We win this debate. Thank you very much.
Speaking time was 8 minutes and 15 seconds.
It's now my pleasure to ask Thomas Sacker to give the opposition reply speech.
in my reply speech, I'm going to explain what is the right comparative to judge this debate according to, and I'm going to explain why we win the comparative, even if all the damages that were presented from team-up proposition really exist. So let's start with what is the comparative. We heard from proposition that the comparative is basically a bad precedent, a chance to change, and we say that's an ideological, they say it's an ideological comparative which is needed in the debate. And first of all, we said that's not true. But second of all, this is completely not true, especially when you read the motion and you see that in the motion itself, you read harm versus goods. We say ideological comparative is not in this debate. That's why our comparative, the alternative versus what the current foreign policy is the comparative we need in this debate according to judge the harms and good. And that also means that stop throwing examples. It doesn't work because we need to throw examples. We need to explain them. We need to use the examples according to understand the harms versus the goods. And lastly, we say they actually agree to it to some extent because they said, and I quote, could have reoriented. That's basically said could have done something else we think is better. And we've just explained to you why that reorientation is just not productive. So let's move to why do we win this comparative. So we basically say that even if, assume that all the damages that were presented by their side, the drones, the spies, all the damages we actually answered in our rebuttal are true. Let's assume for a second they're true. I'm going to explain why we still win this debate. So first of all, they have presented no alternative. They haven't presented why those damages are unique to Obama and wouldn't have happened under any other administration. Second of all, they failed to emphasize the damage. They basically counted on their ideological comparative and said that the fact that it could have changed is critical. But we say no because we need to compare between the damages of what he's done, between the damages of what could have been done, and versus what he did do. So let's move to our examples. First of all, there's Paris. Second of all, there's Syria. Third of all, there's Iraq. Fourth of all, there's Iran, and of course there's Cuba and Myanmar. Why are they critical and outweigh their examples of drones and spies? So first of all, about Paris. We have already explained to you why is that a unique benefit only to Obama. We've already explained to you why, even if it's not legally binding and all the countries won't do anything that's in the contract, not only will they do a lot of it, but it's still a critical agreement to have because of the pressing, the importance of the issue. Second of all, about Syria, we've explained why the foreign policy specifically here, not if we're intervening, and we have already explained to you why it isn't a contradiction, was the right foreign policy, why intervening would have been critically more damaging than anything else. Third of all, about Iraq, we're saying not only that the specific intervention here is very effective currently, ISIS has lost 50% of its territories, but we've explained why even a more aggressive intervention would have created much more harm because military occupation does not create a democracy. Fourth of all, about Iran, we've heard first of all, they have two alternatives. First of all, what they said, we need to press about those, we can't do a deal if they have ballistic missiles. When we say that's not true, ballistic missiles versus atomic bomb, of course we need to look after the atomic bomb. And second of all, about being more aggressive about this deal, we say that's, even if we got the most important part of the deal, which is the atomic bomb, being more aggressive and playing chicken would only risk this critical agreement. We say that shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't happen. So, considering the damage, which were not clear by the proposition, we do not know how many people died by drones. We do not know how many people would have died if we didn't use drones. And considering all the damages, the unique advantages we gave you in Iraq, in Syria, and in Paris, and all of that, with Myanmar and Cuba, we win the debate and the comparative. Thank you.
Speaking time was 4 minutes and 14 seconds.
It's now my pleasure to ask Milan and Karl to finish this debate and give the proposition's reply, please.
This debate is very simple. Has change from the Obama administration been for the better. Because when the opposition team tells you this topic isn't about what he did, we think that's absurd because the Obama administration clearly could have done better and chose to settle for perpetuating and exacerbating the same policies that we knew to be bad in the past. That's why we proudly proposed. 2 questions in this reply. Firstly, on the short term. Secondly, on the long term. Because regardless of what framing you buy in today's debate, it's clear that the proposition is coming out ahead. Firstly, in the short term, we talked to you about places like Libya, like leaders like Muammar Gaddafi, where we saw Obama destabilizing regimes in the region. Now they said, well, at least this is better than the alternative, disregarding the fact that they don't tell you what this alternative is. Because when we say that this is principally bad because you're violating other countries' rights, and practically bad because it destabilizes the entire region, we say that not intervening at all would have been a better solution. But then we talked about drone strikes, and they said, oh well, the alternative is boots on the ground, right? We said no, because at least what you could have done is kept the drone strikes the same, but he raised them by 8 times, and we still don't think that boots on the ground was the alternative. We think that the absence of intervention would have been better. Why is this? Because when you have destabilization in the region, and when you use drone strikes, a particularly damaging form of warfare, it foments anti-Western sentiment. They said we needed to intervene to fight terror. But this terror is caused in the first place because of things like a power vacuum that comes from destabilization. Because of things like anti-Western sentiment that come when you kill 84% of your drone strikes as civilian populations. That's what causes terror. Obama shouldn't be getting credit for fighting a problem that his administration caused in the first place. That's not an advantage for the opposition. Then we said in the short term, you destabilize a region further and harm things like Middle East peace talks when you fund both sides of a conflict, right? When we talk about things like funding the Yemeni regime and the Saudis, and both of them are fighting each other, that's what causes strife within the region that promotes the kind of violence that they decry under their side of the house. So in the short term, when they talk about us needing to intervene, the need to intervene was caused by our actions in the first place, and even when we intervened, the way we did so was particularly damaging to perpetuating this cycle. In the long term, we also think, however, that the Obama administration's policy was damaging as well. The only really advantage they claim here is on climate change. And they say Obama was the first one on the boat to fight climate change. We think when we're in Europe, a continent with far better green technology than our country, the United States, it's clear that Obama wasn't the first one on the climate change boat. But secondly, we think that when in the 1990s in the United States, we signed on to other treaties to limit carbon emissions also, we don't think this was the first administration that tried to fight against climate change. But we also brought you in our third speech that when we sign on to non-binding agreements, which give the illusion of change, that's when real harm occurs. Because now we think we don't have to fight against climate change, despite the fact that nothing has happened in the status quo. That palliative solution is when we get real long-term harms, and we heard no engagement from the opposition bloc on this. What we said the long-term harm was a harmful precedent. Because when you say it's okay to violate international law, when you say it's okay to wiretap your allies, when you say it's okay to fund both sides of a conflict, that's what the rest of the world follows behind. Because what we said was particularly harmful about the Obama administration was not only the short-term harms, which both sides agreed were not very good, we also thought in the long term, the precedent that it set for change was one that was particularly damaging, especially when it had the capacity to do better. At the end of this debate, a lot of examples have been thrown around, I will admit that. But the way you evaluate this round is you consider the comparative. Has the capacity for change been fulfilled? And even if change is compared to the mystical alternative that the opposition talks about, has the change Obama actually caused been good? We think no in the short term because all he did was solve problems that he caused himself, and no in the long term because in terms of the precedent he set, all he did was violate rights and harm other countries. Because change was not what we were promised and not what we were needed. We were proudly proposing.
Speaking time was 4 minutes and 10 seconds.
Thanks to both teams. The judges will now complete their mark sheets and then retire from the room to discuss the debate. After a few minutes, they will return to the room to announce the result of the debate. Please stay in the room while they do so.
Well, actually, would people mind please going outside
We have